Hello, everyone, and welcome to DadMode, God, Grit, and Goals. I am your host, Mike Tobias, and I'm excited to kick off a series that we're going to go through, and this is fundamentally based on a podcast that I heard this week. It was a Joe Rogan podcast. Actually, it's the first time I've ever listened to a Joe Rogan podcast end to end. It's about 3 hours long, and it's with actor Terrence Howard. And you may know him as the villain in Iron Man. What you probably don't know about him is that he has just rocked the world of physics. And you might say, how would an actor know so much about physics? And he gets into that into the podcast, but I want to focus our attention and just lay this out for you. Because I am in a position where this bridge between science and religion has been a lifelong pursuit of mine. And I have a math degree, and I have a computer science degree, and I have a minor in physics. And so I've always been kind of a closet physics geek. And this claim that Terrence is making struck so many notes with me that I'm sitting here today after doing a ton of research on this, which is why I want to turn this into a series where this is so fundamentally shifts things, and he is getting so much flack for it. And physicists who are much smarter than I are denying his claims, and yet I believe him. And I'm just saying that out of my own investigation. And so I want to walk you through a couple of things and why I believe what he is saying actually has credibility. And not only that, I think he's right. And to just give you a quick peek, it just destroys the idea that there's a Big Bang theory. So I think Christians will love to hear that. But he has a different answer, which may not be what you exactly want to hear. But one of the reasons that I believe him is it simplifies everything. And from end to end, the universe, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but the universe is planets spinning around. And as we broke open the atom, smashed the atom, when we looked inside and we noticed it's electrons and protons spinning around, it looks a lot like the universe. And so for probably thousands of years, there's been this idea that is there one equation that could answer everything? And it turns out in the late 1800s was the pursuit of what was called the unified field theory. And so I'm going to walk you through the unified field theory for a second. I'm going to make this simple, but it's a really important concept to understand. The unified field theory says, is there an equation of some sort that would explain why planets encircle each other, why galaxies rotate around, why the atom behaves the way it does, why do quarks do what they do? And this unified field theory says that this equation should hold true at a macro scale in the cosmos and at a micro subatomic scale, and it would answer everything. And there, in the late 1800s, there was a notion that that where there is nothing in outer space, where there's a void, or here on Earth, where there's nothing, or within a molecule or within an atom, there's an electron and a proton, but it's spinning around, and in between there's nothing. There's just space. So what is this space? Well, one of the theories was that things moved within the ether. They called it the ether, and you can look this up, AETHER, ether. And that was disproven by Einstein and thus launched quantum physics. And so the theory of relativity. And all kinds of theories were born out of that. One of them, and I'm not going to get into the science, but a good one to know is Planck's theory. And Planck's equation seemed to satisfy much of this, but when it came to the subatomic level, if we've got one equation that answers everything from the large scale in the universe to the small scale within the atom, it didn't work at the subatomic level. And so we just keep running into these roadblocks. And so there is no really simple way. We're inventing things now like black holes and dark matter, and everything's getting more and more complicated. It's not simple. What Terrence Howard has come up with is a much, much simpler way to see things. And the interesting thing is that he has no credibility for this. And that's one of the things that you would want to know before you would give somebody the benefit of the doubt that, hey, maybe what they're talking about is accurate. And not only does he not have credibility in this space, but he should. He's an actor. And so what could an actor possibly know? So it's like, who's this guy? And I've been thinking about this because, as I said, I do believe him. And it just reminded me of Jesus. Like, he knew so much more. Where did he learn this? He was just the carpenter's son. He couldn't do miracles in his own town. Yet he knew something. And there are those biblical scholars who say, well, actually not biblical scholars, but naysayers who say Jesus couldn't possibly have read anything because he didn't know how to read, because he was born in such a time and in a way where he wouldn't have been taught that. And so it just reminds me of this whole credibility issue. So let me cut to Howard's breakthrough and what his claim is. And it goes to the math. And I'm not going to get too deep in the math, but I'm going to lay out the two concepts. One you'll fully grasp, and the other one's a little bit harder. So the one you're going to fully grasp is that we really understand the world in 2D and 3D, 2 dimensions, X and Y axis, like a grid paper, and 3D, where there's a Z axis that comes up off the paper. It's that third dimension. It's what gives us depth. And that is really how we know the world. And that's how we build things. We build things as rectangles, boxes, triangles, pentagons, the various shapes that we're all familiar with in 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions, cones, spheres, those kinds of things. That's the world in which we live in. That's how we build things. We use bricks, which are rectangles, and we stack them on top of each other, and everything is a brick. Terrence is basing all of his work not in that coordinate system. He's basing all of his work in a different coordinate system. It's a spherical coordinate system, which is more like a ball, okay? And as such, think of a balloon. A balloon expands and contracts, right? And so it contracts, it gets tighter and tighter, or it expands and it gets bigger and bigger. And so things move differently in that context than they do in a rigid Cartesian coordinate system. And once you make that shift, then the whole premise of all of your equations begin to change. And so if you dig into his stuff, you will find that he is pointing out a basic flaw in math as it relates to nature. And that basic flaw in math as it relates to nature is that within nature there is no zero. That zero actually doesn't exist. And that's a little bit of a hard thing to get your head around, that zero doesn't exist. But when you think about it, things are, they exist. And so there is no zero. Zero comes up, and it turns out, you can Google this, zero wasn't even a thing. It was invented, not even discovered, but around the time of money. And so you either have money or you don't have money. That makes sense. You either have something or you don't have something. But that's not nature. Within nature, things are. And so they're either in this form or that form. I'll use water as an example. Water can be a gas or it can be a solid as ice. But it transitions from one to the other. It's never zero. It just moves from one state to another state. And so that's a good way to think about things. So if things are always moving from one state to another state, there is no state where there is nothing. And in nature, living things are born, they grow, and then they die. But the Bible says from dust to dust, right? So Terrence's claim is that there is no such thing as zero, and things don't expand forever. They're born, they live, they grow, they die. And on it goes. And in this spherical coordinate system, things just move consistently in this expansion, contraction way. So a baby is born. We're in this expanding phase, and we expand until we grow and we reach full size, and then we begin to shrink, right? And then we change form. And the idea behind black holes is that there's a zero, that something just goes in and never comes out. And living things are always breathing. And this unified field theory suggests that everything is alive. Everything is breathing in and breathing out. And that the idea behind black holes and all of this is actually just going down the wrong rabbit hole. Because once you have one problem, then you go on and solve the rest. And so it's, what are the preconceived notions and where are we wrong? And his claims are so simple, and yet they're so outlandish because it's going against Einstein. It's going against Newton. It's going against so many things that we hold true that you're going to have a really hard time letting go. The spherical coordinates is just it's such a profound idea, and I'm going to hit a couple of high points that will blow your mind, and you're going to go, this just can't be right. And my hope is that you'll dig into the other podcast because they'll explain it. But I will tell you how foundational this is. So gravity, and I'm just going to speak as if everything is true and realize these are claims, and they may not be true, but I believe they are. So I'm going to speak in that tone. Gravity is not a law. Gravity is is not a cause. It's an effect. And that the earth is not drawing us in, but the universe is pushing us in. And that this idea of the ether is that it exists. So you can think of it this way, that we are under pressure by the ether, and that pressure holds us to the earth, similar to the pressure you would feel if you dove underwater. And you know that the deeper you go, if you had a jug of air, the deeper that you go, if that was in a plastic jug, it would just get tighter and tighter and tighter because the pressure is so great. And if you were to open up that jug, there'd be a bubble inside, and that bubble would come out of the jug, and it would go automatically, no energy required. It would just be lifted to the top because the water pressure is so great, and the bubble wants to go to the top without any effort or energy. It's just the water pushing it up. And so the ether is kind of like that water. It's pushing us into the earth. And therefore, the earth is not drawing us in, and the earth is not hot at the core. You may have heard that, like the core of the earth is the hottest place, and it's full of lava. You may not have heard that. You may have heard that. That's one of the operating theories behind gravity, that the center is going to be the hottest point. And if that were true, then why aren't the deepest parts of the oceans the hottest? They're not. They're the coldest. And so that's just one thought. So what this means, and by the way, his equations, which are spherical in nature, predict all kinds of things automatically. They predict that here's a crazy thing it predicts, that the sun birthed the planets. That's a hard thing to get your head around. There wasn't a big bang, but the sun birthed the planets. And that each of the planets in the solar system, the ones that are furthest away, this is actually a fact, planets are moving away from the sun. The universe is expanding. Those are all things that quantum physicists know. And astrologers know. That the Earth is moving away from the sun at 0.6 miles per year. 0.6 inches per year. And so it takes, 2 years to move an inch. And and all planets started and were birthed from the sun. So the oldest ones are the ones that are furthest away. And that we are in this Goldilocks zone right now. The Goldilocks zone is where people come into play because the earth is inhabitable. And eventually we'll get pushed out further and further, and the earth will no longer be inhabitable. That's one of the claims. Sounds so bizarre. It's not at all what we thought. Which means that it took, you can do the math. He actually does the math on this, but it took 1 trillion years for the earth to get into position. That the universe is way, way older than we ever thought. So there's a lot we're going to get into on this. I just want to share these few things to tell you this is a very worthwhile podcast to listen to, that it's going to change so many things. He has 97 patents, and one of the patents is how to shoot is a gun that shoots not a bullet, but it shoots lightning. And the propellant is water. He has pulled together, because remember, this is the not only the macro scale, but it's also the micro scale. And he's completely pulled together the periodical table. So this is at the micro level. Turns out the periodic table has wavelength connections to it, and everything is a wave. And once you understand that there is an unfolding, an expansion, if you will, and as things unfold or expand, just like color, where you have, and music, so there's the visible light, there's really small light waves and really big light waves. And there's just a small segment that we can actually see. And same with music and audio. There are really high notes and there are really low notes. But there are wavelengths beyond our auditory understanding. And as you've gotten older, you realize you've lost your hearing on the high notes. You can't hear high notes like you could when you were a little kid. And so hearing and our vision system are detectors of wavelengths. And everything is a wave. And it turns out even matter is a wave. And this is why the periodic table is so important. That matter is a wave, and that there are no, that matter is created. How are we created? If everything is a wavelength, this is what when we looked in at splitting the atom, we were expecting to find the stuff of matter, and we didn't. All we found was energy. And it turns out that's the secret. Everything is made of energy, and it at different wavelengths. And if you can alter a wavelength. How do you alter a wavelength? Well, think about the ocean. The ocean's rising and falling, and when two waves collide, then chaos ensues, but it changes the wavelength. And so this is happening everywhere all the time, and that everything affects everything else. And this unified field theory is bringing together the notion that there wasn't a big bang. There is nothing but balance and waves. And when waves come crashing together, new forms can come into existence. It is a beautiful, from a scientific and from a mathematics and from a physics, it's a beautiful simplification of everything. And it works at the largest scales and it works at the smallest scales. You may be familiar with something called a fractal. And a fractal is an equation that unwinds, that it's recursive. And so the deeper you can go deeper and deeper and deeper into it, or you can zoom out. You can zoom in, you can zoom out. And it's the same equation, but it unfolds in a way that is very natural. So when you think about nature, there is nothing in nature that's a straight line. And yet when we architect something, everything is a straight line. And so where we went wrong 100 years ago is thinking that everything was a straight line. That's one area. And that goes back to Newton. The apple falls, but he didn't recognize that the gases rise because everything is moving within a substance, just like the bubble in the ocean underwater. It's going to rise. So that's the opposite of the apple falling. And so did nothing happen where the bubble was? No, the water rushed in underneath. In fact, the water rushed in underneath and pushed the bubble up. That's how it worked. And so the opposite is happening when the apple falls. It's pushing the apple down. And it just looks like it's falling, but it's actually the atmosphere pushing the apple down. It's not gravity. Gravity is a side effect of the electromagnetic field. This is why things rotate. Everything is rotating in space and in our bodies and in every cell and in every atom. Everything is a rotation. And that one rotation, if it rotates one direction, it's a positive energy. And if it rotates in the other direction, it's a negative energy. And so there is this connection between magnets and the electric field, the electromagnetic field. There's no such thing as time-space as a continuum. All of this stuff breaks away. So heady stuff. If it weren't true, he wouldn't have 97 patents. And he is now being heavily criticized. It's interesting to watch the comments. You may not believe me. I happen to believe him. The future of physics is going to be completely decimated and rewritten. And that is actually what he asks at the end of the podcast. When Joe Rogan says, this is true, it changes everything. He said, yes, it does. And he said, where do we go from here? He says, we rewrite every axiom, every postulate, and we will have a new basis of understanding, and the world will change. If you go to his website, terryslinchpin.com, you will see some of the work that he has already done. So not only has he a patent on a gun that shoots lightning using water as a propellant, he has a configuration of drones that are in the shape of hydrogen molecules that can be made very small or very large, and they can be interconnected just as molecules interconnect. And they can connect mid-flight, and they can create and will eliminate the need for cranes. Because now we have just a swarm of drones that can interlock together with each other and pick up any size object. It completely eliminates the need for oil and gas because he has, with this unified field theory, a way to tap into the energy that exists, because mass is everything is made of energy. So we don't need oil and gas to get our energy. Energy it already exists. It's so crazy, and it's so Earth. It's gonna disrupt everything, and there's gonna be a ton of pushback because nobody wants the cheese to move. Because if this is gonna decimate eventually the need for oil and gas, there's gonna be a lot of pushback because the world economy is based on that. This is the craziest stuff. Just wanted to share this with you. Hopefully I've whet your appetite. I'm not a genius, obviously, but I'm a hopeful believer, and I've reached out. I wanna help get this word out. I want to learn more. I want to be part of the volunteer army. And I want your pushback. I want this to be a discussion, but I want you to listen to it first and let me know what resonates, what doesn't resonate. I want this to be a dialogue. Thanks for listening. Joe Rogan, Terrence Howard podcast. It's about 4 million views on that thing. It's 3 hours long. I've listened to it 3 times. I have validated that his patents exist, and there's a lot of basis of truth of what he's putting together. Everything is alive, and there is one God, and he is within us. All of these things are supported by what he's saying. I love you. Have a great day. And we'll do more of this. Talk to you soon.